Well, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't. I shouldn't be criticizing people. So this is a bit where you definitely should. A little bit of an edit. I was going to say some stuff there where I'm like, no, I don't think that should be going out.
Keep them both in the top.
Hey everyone, welcome back for episode 2 of ReFramed. I'm Chad Tingle, and in this episode I'm catching up with my good friend and collaborator, John Anderson Beavers. Now quick heads up, you'll notice I'm wearing a different shirt today than the one in the episode. That's because we recorded this conversation a couple weeks ago, and I'm finally getting time to tape the intro after being deep in production mode for a couple of weeks. Just wanted to bring that to your attention in case you're wondering about the wardrobe continuity. John's a gifted director of photography whose path into filmmaking took him from art school to navigating the unpredictable world of production. We discussed that journey, what he's learned, how the industry has changed, and the role of technology and social media in shaping how we tell stories today. We also delve into our recent work on everybody's work and how that experience challenges to rethink our process, particularly in how we approach interviews and keep storytelling grounded in reality rather than just content for its own sake. Then we dive into Bonda, a narrative piece John shot in Sweden that explores care, responsibility, and what it means to be part of a community. He worked with a multicultural team in a remote location and came away with many lessons, and we discuss how those moments shape the work we want to do next. Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with more thoughtful conversations like this. And I'd love to hear from you. Please drop a comment. Let me know what you liked, what you'd like to see more of, or even where you think I can improve. If there's a particular topic you'd like us to dive into a future episode, let me know that too. All right, let's get into it. All right, John, welcome, man.
Thank you.
Welcome to Reframed. It's weird for me to say that because it's episode 2. The goal of the show is to talk about a project that we worked on together, really kind of explore the creative process of that, and then talk about something that you've worked on separate from me, and explore the creative process of that, what you would do differently if you had a chance to redo it today. Before we get into that, I wanted to kind of start with your journey into the business and how you got started. You're from the UK, but you emigrated to the US as a teenager. And I'd love to kind of hear you talk about just your journey into the creative arts and why you decided to go to an art school and how that manifested into filmmaking.
Yeah, I was an average student in sort of secondary high school area. And I just, I knew I should go to college, but I didn't know what for. I didn't like schoolwork. I had a high school art teacher who made a big impression on me. In fact, I'd say even today, he's probably made one of the biggest impacts. So I thought, I don't know, why not try this art school thing? So my dad said to me, yeah, you should do that, but you should do how did he say? Like a commercial art, he said. So I went to a college in Detroit called CCS, and I started out in this 3D program. So this was the late 90s. I go in this class, and I'd hardly touched computers, to be honest. I think internet just sort of started to be around, and maybe I had written some papers and things like that. Played computer games, obviously, but never really was a computer guy. I was in a class full of sort of these really talented computer nerds that just knew what they were doing, and I was just so out of my element, you know. But part of this program was storytelling, and so I got to mess with cameras, and so that's how I kind of fell into my interest in film, other than, you know, just going to the films and watching a film. And I kind of got pats on the back from some professors and some teachers there, which I guess encouraged me to sort of go even deeper, and that's sort of how I fell into it, you know. And then I got the rude awakening after school of, you know, I'm going to leave and I'm going to be this, you know, cinematographer and this cameraman. And people were like, at least at that time, that's cute. Here's a broom. Here's a coffee order. Go. And I was a production assistant. You know, I guess at the time was frustrating because I really wanted to do more creative things, but looking back on it, it was really valuable. I got to watch people work and get paid for it, basically. You know, it was a really good time. It was different then, but it was the start of, like, I don't know, how do I put this? When I first got into the business, it seemed like the only people who were cameramen were like old white men. And it seemed like the only way I would get an opportunity to even shoot something was literally someone would die or something, you know, like someone would have to die for me to get an opportunity. So, you know, being like a 25-year-old, like PA, but just thinking like, oh, no, I can do this. And like, I'm really believing I could do it, but just not getting the opportunity because, I mean, who's going to trust a kid with all that money and all that responsibility? But, you know, I kept at it. And I think that's different now. I think technology has made that barrier of entry a lot lower. Cameras that used to cost like $500,000 back then look shittier than cameras that cost $1,200 now.
So when you're starting at, say, you know, getting out of art school and everything, are you, after being a production assistant, are you taking the traditional route like most DPs take, where you're becoming a second AC, a loader, a first AC?
No.
You know, was film sort of on its way out then as you were sort of coming up in the business?
Yeah, I remember there was a film, you know, I worked predominantly in Detroit as a PA, and there was one film lab there that I remember dropping film off, but it was not many jobs were even on film then. So this would have been like 2002, I'd say, to 2005-ish. And film was already, I don't know, 30% of the jobs maybe, from my experience.
Yeah.
There was more film, but the size jobs that I was on, it was a lot of, like HD was just coming out sort of thing. It felt like.
Yeah. So like F900s and cameras like that. And
yeah, the Vericam, I remember that one being a big one. To answer your question about AC and doing the second AC in camera department, when I was a PA, I definitely gravitated towards the cameraman and the camera department, and, you know, hopefully wasn't a pest to them. But I ended up getting an opportunity. Well, during all that time, I had a little mini DV camera, and so I would shoot whatever I could. And I ended up working for a production company for a few years. First as a freelancer, where I would go to like events, ride and drive events, a lot of automotive stuff. And I would shoot these Jeep fake, you know, trails that they would make. And auto shows people would come and test drive the cars. And then I'd come back and log and capture the footage literally from the camera tape deck and cut these little videos. And that turned into them hiring me, where I ultimately became an editor for, I think I was there about 2 years. But I was I was a bit of a frustrated editor because I wanted to shoot. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But again, frustration at the time, but now it's very valuable, I think.
Yeah.
To have been on that side and realize we need coverage, or this is too much coverage, we can move on. And saying that with somewhat confidence or with some experiences, I think has been valuable. So, yeah, ended up working out in the end.
Looking back, you were saying that, you know, like if you wanted to shoot something, someone had to die. Do you think it was just a function of a town like Detroit, which,
well,
you know, for people who might be newer to the film business or who may be younger than you and I, you know, I mean, I would imagine Detroit was a big union town, right? A lot of car commercials or work around cars because it's a manufacturing hub for cars in the country. So I would imagine that there was sort of this established old guard, that it was sort of like a few kind of really themed production companies working in town, and they got all the high-end work. And then you had people who were just like these car specialists DPs who knew how to shoot cars. And if you wanted to shoot a car properly, you'd have to get a guy from Detroit because, you know, he knew what came off the factory floor and the reflections and just how to deal with things that a lot of people don't really know about when you think about shooting cars. So you think it was a function of just that infrastructure that really made it a harder market to break into? Yeah,
and I mean, obviously I was joking a little bit. I just think that the job was, I mean, it's always been creative, but it was way more technical then. You know, I think. And it was, you know, there wasn't a video village where everybody is seeing pretty close to the final result. So there was a lot of trust in that person who's the cameraman, and I think that the amount of money that's being, a day of shooting costs. So if you don't want to take a chance, so I mean, it was a bit of a like a magic. They were like magicians in a way, like you did behind the veil or whatever. And I think that sort of mystery is gone. I think because you get a direct feed to, sometimes there's multiple monitors. There's oftentimes multiple monitors on set, right? That everybody's looking at, and everybody's critiquing, and everyone's nitpicking at. So I think that's why. I do remember when I first left college, I had like DVD reels, right? I think I even had VHS ones in case people didn't have a DVD player, right? And I remember I went to the local camera house in Detroit, which is Stratton Camera, and Lon Stratton, who owns it, he's a DP. So I asked to meet with him and talk with him, and he gave me a list of all the guys in town. And most, if not all of them, responded to me and met with me, and if they didn't meet with me, they at least had a phone call with me, and they were all really, really nice. I remember Lon saying to me, and I didn't fully understand it at the time, he went, after he watched my reel, he went, "Yeah, you've got an eye. But so what? No one's going to hire you." I mean, it was kind of blunt. I might be making it sound too harsh, but it was blunt and to the point. And he was absolutely right. Who's going to trust a kid out of college with a DVD with these budgets when there's already a proven person that can do it? But I think it's easier to prove that you have an eye and your talents quicker now.
And what do you think is, in today's day and age, what do you think is the benefit of the democratization? I mean, I know, we hear a lot that there's a downside, but as someone who's always been a bit of a glass half empty kind of guy, I'm a glass full on this idea of democratization and people having access and the ability to see all types of work. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what's sound like the cream floats to the top, right? So I think it's good. I guess sometimes it annoys me that I didn't graduate 10 years later, because then I'd understand social media and all of that nonsense as well. And that's not something I'm comfortable with, just sort of sharing my whole life, which I know is not probably the best thing as we're like little businesses, right? As freelancers. Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, it offers more opportunity, but this job, I mean, Chad, this isn't just about like taking nice photographs. You have to be, you need to be able to work with a team. You need to have to work with clients. You need to be able to collaborate. I mean, it's as much of a management job as it is a creative job as well.
Yeah, especially your job, Yeah. Because, and that's something we're going to talk a little bit about later, the difference between working on, say, a commercial project versus a narrative project versus something that's a documentary. Like, what are the different sort of skill sets that it requires you in terms of management? And so that's definitely something I want to talk about. But I think one of the things too, interesting, you made the comment about, I wish I'd graduated 10 years later, because I think there's also just so much more in the way of resources in terms of what's out there. Like if you get on Shot Deck, right? You can pretty much see every shot from your favorite movie, the pictures, the lens that was used. So in terms of like just references and being a sponge in terms of learning things, there's so much more educational opportunity out there beyond just what you learned in school.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if this is relevant, but I was just talking with a friend today about like there being too much technology and too many choices and too much, like even if you're watching, like with the streamers, for instance, you end up like sitting there and clicking around, and then you're tired before you make a choice, if you even do make a choice. So, I was saying the perfect amount of technology was around the time of the Razor phone, when smartphones weren't quite there. There was a little bit like that mail-in Netflix thing, but there were still physical things and you could visit places. But I also think maybe I'm getting to the age where I think that my good old days were the best. So I don't know. It is what it is. I mean, you got to embrace it, I suppose, I didn't answer your question though, Chad.
You did. No, for sure.
Did?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that was great. Because I think it was sort of like getting a bit of a difference between now and then.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of move forward and sort of talk about Actually, one thing I wanted to kind of go back to, interestingly enough, because I find that as I'm getting older, I'm starting to see some parallels. Because you were, I wasn't the best student either. You talked about not being the best student. Yeah. But, and I never really thought about, there was never really like a vision for me to say like, hey, film school's a possibility, or you can go study broadcasting in school. I just knew I was always sort of interested in that stuff. I'm a tactile learner. So I'd see people with a camera and I was curious, like, could I hold on to the camera? Like, what happens when I look through the eyepiece? As a kid, I used to watch a lot of sports documentaries. I was like riveted by sports on TV. And I always thought that I wanted to be a play-by-play announcer. That was something that was sort of in my head. Storytelling always interested me. I'm wondering if, as you were growing up, as you're going to the movies and stuff like that, did you have like this imagination of what happens beyond what's going on camera? Was that always in the back of your mind?
Yeah, it wasn't. It's funny enough, it wasn't. I mean, I loved going to the films and I loved looking at pictures and magazines and playing video games and stuff. And like you, I'm just sure many times I wanted to be a professional athlete, but that wasn't going to happen. I sort of fell into it and I'm glad I did because, it's like my passion now. In fact, I sometimes say I need another hobby because I can't just be working all the time. And then when I'm not working, my hobby is working, so like finding something else just to balance it out. But no, as a kid, I loved films. I wasn't making VHS or Super 8 films or anything like that. I guess I would draw. But yeah, I was just a sort of, normal kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that's not something that is sort of in our lexicon.
I know.
That much.
They've all got a plan
kind of
now, don't
they?
Yeah.
The unremarkable is, I heard somebody say the other day, it's like, it's okay to be the unremarkable as a kid or a young adult.
Yeah. I was definitely remarkable as a kid, though. I'm joking. Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and sort of talk about the project that we recently worked on. But before I do that, we met through my really good friend Marlon Johnson, who at some point I'll have on another episode at some point once I talk to him. He's going to
be great.
He's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
But, I felt like we met and we hit it off right away. So, there's not many people that I know who are DPs who are really comfortable in the commercial space, the narrative space, and the documentary space, especially the way I make documentary films.
Okay.
There's DPs I know that make really artful documentary content. Right? But there's not many DPs I know that, at least when I was coming up, I know some really good documentary DPs, but they are just immersed, especially if you work in like the Verite space, they are just really immersed in that space. And that is their specialty. That's what they do. I don't find too many people who can sort of like you were saying, the management side of it, work on a commercial setting, and then essentially can just pick up a camera and then run with it. It's right. For sort of the type of documentary filmmaking that I like to do. We did the project in Baltimore and DC, and then we had also done the thing in, we had tried to do that project with Marlon in Kentucky. We went to Kentucky and Nashville. Yep. So I think from seeing those projects and kind of...
I met you before that though, didn't I?
We met
before a project.
Yeah, the first time we met was I want to say was the 2017 Miami Film Festival.
Okay.
Because Symphony in D, which is Marlon's film, was screening, and then you came down for that, and that was sort of the first time that we met. But then we worked together in 2018 right after that because we had that project in Baltimore that Marlon was trying to get off the ground, and then again in 2021 as we were like coming out of lockdown, we did the project in Kentucky. When I got this project, this film that I directed that came out last year, and now Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is actually giving it away now completely for free. Now everyone can have access,
very cool,
which is pretty cool. And that's something that's a little bit of a different model of filmmaking than we were used to, but it could be the way of the future. I talk to people a lot about that at times where, if you have a funder who wants to fund a film for impact, they're not looking to make money off it. They'll just produce the film, and then they'll give it away to the public, in platforms.
Where can you see it? Like whereabouts?
So you can basically get a link. You can just go to the Everybody's Work website, and there's a link, and you can request. You can get it if you just want to watch it at home by yourself. If you want to organize like a screening at like a community center or with a group setting at your home, you could do that. And then if you want to do like a bigger screening, like if you have like a civic organization and, you know, you may have 100 members and you have access to like a community center, and you can screen it that way as well for 100 people. So you could be an audience of one, or it could be an audience of 5,000, which I think is kind of an amazing thing that I never really thought of coming up in the documentary world. It was just like, hey, you made a film, you got into a festival. Depending on the topic, maybe you would get some distribution, or hopefully you got a funder and a grant. You made the film, and then, you know, it got you some exposure so you can go on and make something bigger, right? That's always been sort of the MO. But I remember when I got the project, the other thing about the project that was unique, why I felt you were the right person for the project, is because I got the project through an agency, which is sort of unique. You don't really find ad agencies, marketing agencies, branding agencies working on documentary films. That was sort of a very unique proposition. So it was sort of like, okay, I really need somebody who understands the documentary, traditional verite, pick up the camera and go in all situations kind of person, but also somebody who also understands the commercial side and understands, okay, we have to sort of have like a little bit of a video village for the agency. We have to loop them in on what we're going to be doing and break down the conversations for them visually, right? Yeah. Because they obviously bring a certain lens to it. They want the story, but they also want it to look aesthetically a certain way that would maybe be a little bit different than if I was doing this on a shoestring budget and I would say, hey, John, let's just pick up a small camera and we'll just run and gun. We'll light wherever possible, but we'll shoot as much of it in situation as possible. Versus in this situation, it was sort of like trying to find the balance. So I want to ask, what do you remember about the initial stages of the project? So that's not just my lens, but I'm curious as to how you saw it, you know, once we talked about it.
Well, it seemed interesting because we'd been doing a lot of healthcare commercials together too. So to then go into a dark, you know, it's like, oh, well, we're used to shooting in hospitals, even though we really didn't actually shoot in hospitals that much, did we?
Not really.
Not really.
It was a difficult ask because of HIPAA concerns.
Yeah. I remember you talking about wanting to make it feel international. So being in different parts of the country was really important. I remember the challenge of, even though it was an agency and they were funding the doc, it still had budget limitations, right? So our crew was thin, which I think we leaned into. I don't think we chose to use that as an advantage rather than something that held us back. I think, at least. I remember that you were very prepared, if I can say that. Like, you went above and beyond on this. You're definitely the MVP. You, and then on the crew side, it was Miles who was managing. We had three, maybe four cameras, if you count like the little GoPros and things we had.
Yeah.
And he was, you know, at night when we'd come home from really long days of shooting, was in his hotel room managing all that media and all of that. Yeah, I remember it being fun too. We had a really small but really cool team. We had the Sony it's FS9 they're called, right? FS9.
Yeah, we had two Sony FX9s and then
FX.
And then you made a great suggestion as we were prepping, which was to like get an FX3 because it would be easier in cars and also just safer. And that was something I hadn't thought about.
Well, yeah, I've seen this video of a crash test dummy with a camera like this, which we've all done, and it crashes and thing goes in your head. And, you know, PSA, people shouldn't shoot in cars on live roads like that. It's not safe. But I do remember, too, the FX3, because we were going from town to town. We were in Oklahoma. We were in California, right?
Yeah. We were in Sonoma County.
We were in New York.
Yep. And we went to Oakland as well.
We went somewhere else in the East as well.
We went to Connecticut. And we went to Sacramento.
Were we in Detroit too?
No, we didn't go to Detroit.
Okay. But I do remember wherever we went, with that little FX3 was getting buzz because they had just shot like a big sci-fi film with it. So any local crew we picked up went, oh, did you hear about it?
Yeah, the creator.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
I haven't
yeah, yeah.
seen, but I've seen the trailer and obviously looks great.
It's
So it should
amazing,
be.
and there's a great talk. There's a great talk on YouTube, a shot deck talk with the director and the two DPs, Greg Fraser and the other guy, Oren. I forgot what his name is.
Yeah,
They talk about the process behind that.
yeah. And so, if I remember sometimes going, oh, we should just shoot the whole thing with this, but that could have just been me not wanting to carry a bigger camera around, you know.
You know what? Looking back now, it probably would have worked
Yeah,
fine. It
yeah.
actually probably would have worked fine if we had just had two of those. I think even
We
if we
did
had a
in New York, right? We ended up shooting some like street stuff with that smaller camera, just
yeah,
so
and
we didn't look like we were a film crew,
yeah, we snuck on
basically.
the train. Remember, snuck on the subway
Yeah,
because we could put it in a backpack.
yeah.
You
No,
know,
you had a permit, surely, right?
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
okay. But it's one of those things where I think we probably could have shot the whole film on it. I think because when we went into post, it actually matched. There's not really a difference. I think the only difference is obviously the 9 gives you like time code, and it gives you it gives you
Right,
some peripherals that I think are just better
right.
for when you're trying to finish in a higher end post production environment. But I think one of the things that stood out to me, and I'd love to get your take on this, is when I got the project, and I was having this conversation with my friend last week, who was on the other episode of the show. I was talking about this idea of a film versus content, right? And when I got the project, I thought, oh man, I could make this look really good. And maybe I'll talk to John about
Yeah,
let's get an AC. Maybe we shoot this on the Red. Maybe we shoot it on Alexa Mini, and we have a focus puller and we really kind of stylize it. But then I was like, it would really slow us down, and I really wouldn't be able to capture the stories that we need in the way that I would
right.
like to capture them, right? I wanted things to feel like the real environment. Like if we did go into a hospital or I was interviewing a nurse at the nursing desk, I wanted it to feel like we were actually in the place. And so
Yeah,
and there's this idea today. I see a lot of beautiful work that's documentary work, and it's amazing looking. And I'm almost envious when I see it, right? Like you were talking earlier about wish you'd graduated 10 years later. I see a lot of work and I'm like, man, this is amazing. But at the same time, it requires a lot of setup to produce that work. And I wanted to sort of be in the moment and not have anything filtered, if that
yeah.
makes sense. What are your thoughts on this idea of,
I
content
mean,
versus something that's actually a film?
yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. I know what you mean. Like content's just sort of filler. I think it was a film because it had something to say, basically, that was more than just selling a product. I guess, if you want to be cynical about it, you could say, oh, well, you're selling an idea. But I don't, it wasn't that. We were presenting a problem, and there was some discussions around solutions, and we were just letting people, we were just giving them a platform to share their thoughts. I think, you put it in a structure that's I guess recognizable as a story and a structure to it. So I guess that's how I saw it. I don't know. I don't know how to talk about the difference between content
Yeah.
and films other than intentions, I suppose.
And that's a great point. That's a great point, because that's something that I've been talking about a lot is intention. That was something that I thought about in terms of the way I wanted it to be received, because I think I could have gone in a direction where it was sort of, hey, let me just make this look really slick and really pretty.
It's interesting because it was, there were clients in it, right? But I didn't feel like I never felt like, I mean, you obviously dealt with them more than I did, but I never felt like they were clients as traditional. Like they weren't nitpicking. They seemed to trust you. They seemed to be on the same page, and they seemed to respect that you were making a film.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, if I look back over the process of the entire experience, which, took a year between production and post, there wasn't really many arguments that sometimes you can typically have on commercial projects about creative direction. I think there were some things that they held really strongly to, and and then there were some things maybe in the beginning I might have had an initial feeling about something where they might have said, hey, think about it from this perspective. They were right. So at the end of the day, the best idea wins, right? Regardless of who came up with it.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, we've done a lot of healthcare work together. And I'm this kind of big believer in terms of whenever you work with stuff in healthcare and patients and things like that, you want it to be real people. You want it to feel real. You want to be telling really good stories. And in some cases, there's ways to sort of illustrate those stories or set things up in a way where things look really beautiful. They're lit really well. They're very stylized. They're art directed. And so I think of that as content. It doesn't mean that there's not a story being told.
Right, I understand.
It's being told in an artful way. Whereas to me, in a film, you know, I think one of the decisions I made after really racking my brain about it was, oh, it'd be great to, like I said, shoot this on Alexa and use, you know, a big chip and a lot of depth, shallow depth of field, and just make everything look really pretty. But at the same time, like, you know, I don't mind for a project like this that the camera bobbles, right? Or that there's a shake or a focus buzz, right? Because to me, that's what would happen in real life. And so that's what I meant in terms of maybe my old fart ways about documentary filmmaking and Verite filmmaking and the idea of being the fly on the wall and being right there when things happen. I felt like I really had to make a decision between the two because I had also done some commercial work and I liked the beauty of that stuff. But, you know, there could be this conflict of the film looking beautiful, but then having no substance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. To me, I felt like I got out of the way. It wasn't a film about beautiful photography, right? I don't think. But at the same time, hopefully what I did isn't completely ugly. I'm not suggesting that. Like the interviews, for instance, we had them looking directly down the lens. So it was just, let's not try and reinvent the wheel, because it's not about, wow, look at how creative these interviews are shot and lit. It's about what are they saying and how can we get out of the way? And this goes for if it looked completely ugly too. If it looked disastrous and framing was wrong, and people would probably be like, there's something not right there. So it was just, let's light them traditionally. Let's frame it somewhat traditionally so that what they're saying is the most important thing that they're getting from this. And there's no distractions. When it came to like getting the more Verite stuff, I think I was handheld almost all the time, right?
Yeah.
So I was just reacting to what I saw. But even that, like I say that even though I'm using available light, you can still light. And I don't mean by turning lights on and off, which you can certainly do that too. But I mean just in where you stand and where you position yourself based on the relativity of like what the natural light is doing. It can either make the image look really flat or it can make it look really dynamic. So that's something I try to think about when I'm shooting, you know, B-roll or Verite or however you want to word it, is, all right, where is everything coming from? And hopefully with practice it comes quicker and quicker. And where's the best place for me to stand and frame this so that it can look filmic, I suppose. And that's also lensing and aperture and all of that stuff too, where you're at.
No, which is great, which is the things I'm terrible at, right? Because I think that it worked out well in the long run for me, because even a simple thing is like, I remember we were shooting in the park in Oakland, and I'm just like, my thing is like, okay, the person can sit at this bench, but you were like, hey, if we move her over here, right? Just make, you know, it was just you with the FX3 and me behind you, because again, we didn't have a permit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we did. I think we did.
We don't want to tell Robert Johnson Foundation that we didn't have a permit, but we did not have a permit.
Yeah.
So, but it was like just you with the camera and me, and then Miles was just kind of helping.
Yeah.
But it was like, you know, just sometimes you, as a director, I get so locked in on the people.
Yeah.
So it's always really important to me to have a DP who's really backing me up in terms of the visuals and just telling me, hey, to make another adjustment here. I think it was a similar case. My favorite scene in the film is a scene in Oklahoma, where we had this woman, Sonia, and her mother, and we went at like 5:30 in the morning to their
Yeah.
house, and we basically shot her waking her mom up, who's elderly and has some issues health-wise, and just basically her trying to take care of her mom. It's such a different moment from all the other scenes in the film because we're talking about nursing in a healthcare setting. And then here's this one scene where we see nursing in a personal setting between just a parent and a child. And I thought that that was, one, it was a role reversal of mother to daughter, right? Now all of a sudden it's a child taking care of a parent. But I thought it was, to me, it's the best scene for me in the film.
Yeah.
And probably the scene I was probably the most nervous about capturing, but I think it was one of those things where I kind of just stayed out of your way. It's actually one of the things I really love about Verite filmmaking is I can just be like, hey, this is what we're trying to capture. And I just kind of let you do your thing. And I felt like we just got some really amazing stuff just by listening.
You did let me do my thing, but it's similar when I've worked with Marlon. So on the way there, there's discussions about like, what's the tone of this and what we're trying to achieve and what, you know, this is what's going to happen. Sometimes it's, I think this is what's going to happen. Be ready for this. But this, I think we knew that this was like a morning ritual they had, right? If I remember.
There's a morning ritual of her waking her mom up, but she wanted to do the foot bath thing.
We knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
I think.
And they she sort of prepped her mom that, hey, the crew's coming and this is going to happen. But what we weren't prepared for is really what her mom said to her.
Sonia, you know that I appreciate you coming over every morning and for what you do for me. You know that I love you and I'm thankful to Creator for you.
Thank you, Mom. Well, this morning I want to go ahead and do a little ceremony for you, a water ceremony. I want to help our people heal, help you heal from all the things that we've been through.
It wasn't rehearsed.
No, they were really comfortable with us being around. I think I had the smaller camera too, so it didn't look like we were a big sort of production in there or anything.
Yeah.
But, you know, there is a lot of prep that you prep me to go in there. And I've got that all in my mind. So I'm not just left to my own devices, I guess is what I'm saying, which was interesting to learn, like working with you and with Marlon about how to, you know, DP for a doc director that is kind of sometimes when we're shooting is watching unfold and might look at you and you point like, hey, there's something over there, or, you know, it's different.
It is a very, very different skill set. It's almost like you're kind of creating on the fly, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think it, like you were talking earlier about having editing experience, of knowing when you have the coverage. That's the other thing too that I think that's helped me is having edited so much when I was a lot younger as a way to pay the bills, even if it was stuff that was complete crap. Right. The bottom, you know, just taking, as you like to say, polishing a turd. Right. Taking something that's really bad. Yeah. You use that one a lot. But if you know, taking something that's really bad and finding a way to put a good spin on it and turn it into something is something that, you know, set me up early in life for where I am now.
You said like being able to work on the fly. That's not to be confused with not knowing not having a plan. Not. Like it's an analogy of like you're in Miami, you need to get to New York. And there's a path there. Sometimes you might take little detours, but you're still, you know where you're going. And I feel like, you know, that's been my experience with working with you on this doc. Like there was a plan and an end. There was a beginning and maybe the middle was not as solidified, but there was an end. So you knew where you were going.
Yeah.
The whole time. So, you know, just not to, or add to, it's just not throw everything up and see where it lands. There's definitely, there's structured storytelling going on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's about having the right outline and I wouldn't even really call it a script. It's just, you know, having some ideas in your head of some things you want to capture. And I would say, you know, one of the things part of the reason I want to do this show is to kind of, you know, just look back at my work and sort of think about how could I improve it, where I want to go in the future.
Yeah.
And also talk to my collaborators and see how they feel about certain things now that things have aged a little bit. I would say my second favorite thing about the film was how we shot in Seattle with Dr. McLemore. And that was sort of a decision, like you were saying, how you have a plan and how you have to take detours. That was a situation where I saw somebody who was incredibly busy, just to even get her for the film, someone who travels a ton, always on the road, had a lot stacked into her day.
All day, right? Pretty much.
All day. And I just knew that she was not going to have time to sit down for a traditional hour and change interview. It wasn't going to happen. There were too many things on our calendar for us to be like, hey, let's block your calendar off for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours between lighting adjustments and, things like that to do this in-depth interview, right? Because she had so much to say. But I think probably the best decision I made, and I wish I could have gone back and shot the entire film like this, was just to say, listen, we're just going to show up, start at your house. We're going to go with you to work. We're going to stay with you at work all day, and we're just going to capture everything you do.
Yeah.
Right. And basically, I had my questions, I had everything, and I asked some in the car and some at her house. And my favorite part today, still, I would say the most fun I've ever had in an interview, or the best interview I've ever done for a film or for a project, was the interview we shot in her office. Although that put a lot of strain on you because you had to operate the entire thing from the easy rig for like an hour and a half. I had this conversation with her, but it didn't really feel like an interview. It just felt like her and I were having this discussion, and me just taking all the things I'd witnessed during the day and kind of folding it into the other questions I had. And to me, it ended up being, I would say, probably, in terms of the scenes that are chosen in the film, in terms of what she says, probably some of the most powerful stuff in the film is from that impromptu interview where I finally said, I need you to sit down with me for like half hour, 45 minutes, and let's just circle back about what we witnessed today.
Yeah, that was the end of the day we did that. All right, this is my memory of it. We started at her house or her apartment, and we got in the car with her and we drove. And then we were in an office. I felt like it was up like a third or fourth floor or something. But then I don't remember why, but we ended up in did she have two offices?
She does.
Okay.
She does. So we walked from one building to another building. Then the best thing
that
is, like,
opens the film, right? That office, right?
Yeah, the cold open opens the film. But then the other thing as well too is, like, when she's in the first office, obviously it's Seattle. It's raining. It goes dark. The windows are tinted, and like raindrops are on the window. I think we shot a lot of that on a 70 to 200. I feel like we went back and forth between the wider lens and the longer lens, but then we realized a lot of it just looked better on the longer lens because the outside was dark and rainy and moody, and we just kind of leaned into that moodiness and almost, and sometimes too we're shooting stuff in silhouette, which and so I was just like, man, if I could, as I was in post, I was like, this is how we should have shot the entire film. Because I think for that day too, we just decided, like, okay, if we're not going to do an interview, let's not have a gaffer, right? It's not worth it. And it was also like a budgetary decision. Because
did we do any other interviews like that? I don't think we did we?
No, we didn't. We
shot some panels and some round tables.
We did not. But I also think I told the producers, Rob and Courtney, that if you give me the half day with Sonia and her mom, then what I'll do is I'll just shoot the stuff in Seattle without a gaffer and lighting equipment, and that'll save us money to be able to afford to go shoot Sonia and her mom at their house, right? Because we were going to go, we drove the night before from Oklahoma City, woke up at 4 a.m, shot, and then we came back to the airport and flew out that night to go to New York. So it was sort of like
I flew home that night.
You did fly home.
And then I met you in New York.
Because you had a personal thing. But I made a deal with them. That was like the deal with the devil. It's like, hey, give me the extra half day that we're not budgeted for, but let's take away this from Seattle, and then we can afford what we need in Oklahoma. So that was like, from a storytelling perspective, I knew I wanted these two things. But the thing with Dr. McLemore was just a gut call. It was just like, we don't need to light this. We just need to go and just shoot it.
No, I mean, she was being lit by that window. And it was, we could just go.
Yeah.
And it made her more comfortable too. I would imagine.
Absolutely. And I've been having these conversations with Marlon a lot about not including interviews in films that we do in the future.
You mean interviews as in like sit down traditionally, but you would do them, I don't know if verite is the right word, but on the fly, like as they're moving about.
Yeah, and kind of like what I did with Dr. Nakamura. It's like it sort of feels like an interview, but it's not really an interview. It's really a conversation that we just captured, right? It's captured conversation, not staged conversation. So,
but I think it's great. I think it's a great style, but I don't think the other way is wrong either. It's just different, is all.
Yeah.
I mean, there is something about, we use the eye direct thing where they're looking, so it looks like they're looking directly in the lens, like at you. And I don't know, there is something to be said about that, two of them saying something important, maybe gives it a little bit more authority to what they're saying. So again, it's just different from what you're saying. And I agree with you. I did like the organicness of what we did there. But there's many ways to sort of skin it, I suppose. So I'm not disagreeing.
I think Marlon's definitely in a place where he's like, I want to push the art form. Right? And to a certain extent, I feel the same way. But at the same time, it didn't throw the film off to just have this one interview that didn't look the same as all the rest.
No, it didn't.
It really kind of just blended in.
Was that, we weren't concerned about that though, were we?
No,
I honestly,
not at all.
I remember being so busy, that we didn't really have time. It was like,
you shot the whole day. Usually we have windows where you get a break. There's no break on that day.
Yeah. Was that our last day as well? Was that one of our last days?
No, our last day was Connecticut.
I had a second camera operator. His name was Bob. Do you remember his last name?
I don't remember his last name.
He shot with Errol Morris.
I know. Right? He shot like he shot the Hillary Clinton film. He shot like some of like my favorite documentaries ever.
I mean, that Interrotron kind of look where they're looking directly in the lens, like I was saying.
Yeah.
He had definitely done way before I did. So when I'm calling him with like, hey, here's sort of how we like this and the aesthetic of it and this is what we're going for, I'm basically telling him, hey, we're sort of ripping off what you did 20 years ago.
He went deep in the paint because he was like, I really want to know what you're doing. I want to know what you're trying to, he's like, I just want to make sure that he was very much like, it was definitely very much an old school cameraman who's been doing this for like 50 years. And he was like, I don't care if you've seen what I've done, or I don't care that you're ripping off what I did. He was just like, I just want to know what you intend and what you want to do. And in a way, I learned a lot from him, actually. I'm really glad you actually remember this because I totally forgot about this.
It was just funny, the call with him, like, we're basically doing we're ripping you off.
That's right. I forgot about that. I remember now that you're saying this. Me and Miles were with him because you were flying back in. And we were getting an establishing shot of a sign with the building in the background, and he had the gaffer kick a light on the sign,
which we weren't doing.
Which I was like, man, you must be working on stuff that has a big budget where you can take time to light a sign on an establishing shot. I was like, I'm here for it. But I was just like, it actually, in a way, too, kind of opened up my mind to when I've seen these big Errol Morris projects, why they look the way they do. It's because there's somebody with that intention of just like, hey, just give me a little bit of a kick on this sign so it stands out.
For Defenders, though, I don't think lighting the sign was the visual language of our film.
I don't think so either, but I think that's the way he.
But he was a gentleman, and it was just a pleasure, like spending a day with him.
Yeah.
And hearing his stories. And stuff.
he was great, and I also too just like the way he thought about stuff. And he actually told me at the end, he was like, man, you're doing something really interesting here. It was actually kind of like a compliment. Like I really kind of took it to heart because he was like, when you talked to me, I didn't really understand how this is all going to come together. But seeing like how you really talked to them and how you really got these nurses to open up, he's like, I think you got some great stuff today. So it was Bob Chappell, cool. Bob Chappell,
and a really, really nice person too. He was really, really cool to work with.
I wish we had Miles on to talk about. Miles
I
was trying
know.
to teach him how to use the camera, like the settings in the camera,
Yeah.
like on set, which was sort of. I have some interesting pictures that I'll share from that of just having
Well,
him.
and a shout out to Miles too, Miles Butterfield. If you're ever in Detroit and you need an AC,
Yeah, Miles is the man.
he's great. Yeah,
hard worker. Last question I would ask about it is, would you approach it differently today if we were starting from scratch today? I know what I would do, but would you approach it differently?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But I think moving forward now, I would approach maybe our prep differently. I would maybe question, all right, how are we going to do these interviews? Well, what if we did them this way? To sort of maybe talk about that beforehand rather than discover that after. Like, it's only a regret if you don't adjust for the next project, right? So I guess that's sort of what I mean. But no, I think that without sounding like things are supposed to be the way they're supposed to be, like that film, I mean, it unfolded the way it was supposed to happen. We went there, we had a plan, and we executed it. I think really well, if I can say that about our own work. And then I remember watching it too and being like, this is really good as well. That's why I asked you where I could see it. Because I want people to have a look at it. I think.
Yeah, I'll definitely put a plug in the show link so people can go register for it.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll come back and talk about your project. All right, so we're back. So I want to talk about a project that's I know has been near and dear to your heart. I think you even tried to get me involved a couple of times. It wasn't in the cards for me to be as involved as I would have liked to have been.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about.
But you were a huge help, though.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The name of the show is Reframed, obviously, and we're talking about what we would do differently in our approaches if we had the opportunity to redo this again. So tell me a little bit about Bond, the film. Maybe just explain to the audience like what the film's about, how the story came about, and you and the director Billy have been working on this, trying to get this project off the ground for a long time. So just kind of give us some backstory, because you shot it at the beginning of this year finally. So I just want to hear your journey with that project.
Yeah. So Billy Chester is a director I met in Detroit. He now lives in Sweden. He married a Swedish lady and they moved there. But when he was in Detroit, we had made some other projects and we'd been talking about, I think it's pronounced Bonda. It means farmer in Swedish. So we'd been talking about this project since about 2019, I think. And then obviously the pandemic happened. And then, that turned into like Billy rewriting it and changing it. And then we were going to do it. I think it was in 22. I was over there and we were scouting. For whatever reason, scheduling with whatever actor was involved, it just kind of fell apart. And then periodically we would talk about it again. When we would call just to check in on each other, we would talk about it, we're going to do this, but it just kind of lost steam for a couple of years. And then I would say like summer of 24, it started to really pick up steam again. Was an actor that came on board he was great in it. Yeah. And there was, you were helping out Chad for a little while there. There was a producer in Sweden that did a ton, or a couple of them that did a ton to make this happen. There was a lot of sweat equity. There was a producer locally that has a production company. His name's Ben. He had a lot of contacts to local crew and things like that. So he really helped facilitate me getting in contact with, lighting crews and camera, people in camera department and things like that. It felt like it was never going to happen. And then all of a sudden they were booking me a ticket and I was off to Sweden. I mean, it happened pretty fast. So I think I got there a week before we shot, and Billy and I scouted and planned. We shot in an old, it's like a museum almost. It's a house that hasn't been touched since the 40s, 50s, something like that. So everything's kind of really old in there. But it was winter, so it was closed. I should backtrack. We shot on a little island in Sweden called Gotland, which I think is typically like a summer destination for people there. So it was quiet on the island. This museum was closed, so we kind of had the run of it. And when I say museum, it literally was a house. It was a farmhouse. So we spent a week and we scouted and we kind of planned as much as we possibly could to make our days efficient. And then we had a small crew, but they were mighty, and they were just on the same page, and it became like a little family really quick. Yeah, it was just overall one of the most positive experiences I've ever had.
Yeah.
Shooting a project like that, you know.
Well, tell me a little bit about the story behind the film. I know it's based on Billy's family member. Talk a little bit about just his story, and then I want to talk about the experience of working with a crew from a different country who may even speak a different language. But I'd love to hear about just the story of Bonda and what the story is about.
So I read the script in English, obviously, but the film is in Swedish. So, you know, that was interesting. But basically the story revolves around a character named Hassa, and he's intellectually disabled. And essentially he comes into his house after a day of doing chores, and his caretaker, who is his mother, is dead in an armchair. And then the rest of the story kind of unfolds of how he handles that, you know, trying to find help for his mum. He doesn't really know what to do. And it's kind of a character study on Hassa. It's a very quiet and methodical and slow film. That's without giving too much away. That's what it's about.
From talking to Billy, when, you know, I was involved in some of the conversations, there's this larger theme of people with these intellectual disabilities as they age and get older and their parents die. Who's there to take care of them?
Who's going to take care of them? Yeah. There is that. I think that's a strong theme through the film, for sure. I don't think it's like battered over your head, though. I think it's done really subtly. And yeah, that is one of the themes. Also, just how does this guy, I mean, I would say almost like his, you know, rebirth moment in the story is that he's able to finally mourn. You know, it's like the anxiety of, he knows that this has happened, but he doesn't know how to handle it. And there's a problem that he can't solve. So there's like this subtle bubbling anxiety that you sort of have with him throughout the film.
And how did you interpret all that in terms of going from the script to then kind of creating this visual language, which is kind of what you were brought in to do for the film? What was your approach?
It evolved because we were going to do one thing when we first was going to do it, and then it kind of got scrapped. And then, you know, along the way, we talked about it. I mean, again, to use our limitations as strengths, you're like, no, we're going to use our limitations and use them as choices rather than, you know, try and make it look like we had a crane when obviously we didn't have the money for that. We set visual rules, like the camera's almost always locked off. Or if it is moving, like we had a couple of gimbal shots, like the proximity is locked off, so they're moving at the same time. There was a couple of, maybe one scene we did handheld as well for different reasons, but that was kind of, you know, visual rules we set for ourselves. I wanted it to look really natural.
Any particular reason why you wanted it to look natural versus something that was, say, maybe hyper stylized or moody?
Well, I certainly wanted it to be beautiful. I wanted it to feel like light was coming just from windows or from a practical. I just wanted, so I guess like, I mean, we obviously lit it, so it wasn't real, but I wanted it to be like that cinema reel. I don't know, it just sort of felt, that's what felt appropriate, I suppose. And again, the limitations we had, we didn't even have the crew to set up enormous lights or a lot of lights. Although what they did set up is quite impressive. There was only 3 of them.
And it also too, like you lose light really fast in Gotland, right? Like it gets dark at like 3 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 o'clock, but I might be exaggerating. Yeah, no, there were times where it looks daytime. It's completely artificial. We were bouncing a lot of light through windows. So every window we had something bouncing in. Yeah, that was hard. That wasn't only hard, like production wise, that was just hard on your body clock. You know, it's like lunchtime and it's pitch black out. Yeah. So yeah, that was tough.
Talk to me about the small and mighty crew and how was that, you know, working with, obviously everyone speaks English on the crew, right? It's you know, but
yeah,
you had people from all over the world, actually. I think you said there was a guy from Brazil or something like that. And
he was,
you know, so talk about.
He was a rock star.
That's awesome, man.
There were
Talk
2
about
of them.
That process of how you guys all work together to sort of conquer this project.
So Victor was the gaffer. We zoomed. beforehand. I think he was in Brazil at the time. I was in the States. He splits his time between Sweden and Brazil. I think he's half Swedish, half Brazilian. Everyone on the crew seemed like they spoke at least 2, if not 3, 4 languages, which was really impressive. I remember the first and second AC were talking English to each other without me being involved. And just out of curiosity, I said, do you guys speak English to each other? Just when they're like, no, usually Swedish. And I said, you can talk Swedish to each other. And they thought would be rude if they spoke another language around me. So that's how cool this crew was. And obviously they could have spoke Swedish. The DIT, I couldn't even list the languages, but I know one of them was Russian. The gaffer was Portuguese, Spanish, English, and Swedish. They're just really, just crazy. But everybody, I had no problems at all ever with a language barrier working with anyone on that crew, including in front and behind the camera.
And
everyone spoke English.
How do you feel that they transcribed your visual language into,
It was seamless. I never had a problem. Maybe it's because we were so small and people were wearing a lot of hats. I mean, everything was on the iPad with the lights. So Victor was pretty much next to me the whole shoot. And we were tweaking as we went just to taste. No, I never had any issues, but we did have half a dozen Zoom calls before the shoot and just talked about, looked at stuff, looked at pictures and talked about light qualities and all that flowery stuff that you talk about before a shoot. But it was good because we were like friends already. We became really fast friends and that made it easy. And I had absolutely no issues communicating what we were going for. It couldn't have gone better.
Yeah. And so I know the film's still in post-production. You guys are still working some things out. Is there anything looking back on the experience now that you would have done differently? Anything that you would have changed, whether it's camera, it's lenses, if you had if you could go back and make some decisions, is there something you wish you could have, I'm sure you've seen the footage, is something you wish you could have done differently to maybe get a little bit of a different outcome?
So I've got to say something, otherwise I'll sound like an egotistical maniac, right? So, and I'm not, I'm like self-loathing. It's again goes back to like things I don't think we could completely control. There's certainly things I look at and I go, oh, colorists might need to help us out on that one a little bit. But I am pretty proud of like what we were able to accomplish with what we had. Even like the light situation of like we would pull in and it was dark. Or like there's a whole scene where these boys bully the main character and the sun is just low the whole time. And at any moment it's going to be gone and we're just chasing it. And, so I guess I wish we had a couple more days, but I don't know if that's something I would do differently because I couldn't. I had no control of that. We tried to prepare the best we could. I really think we did that well, for me to like really, but sometimes when time passes by, I go, oh, it wasn't so bad. Like I really hate something, like, I'm just shit at what I do. Why am I even doing this? And then like 5 years will go by and I'll look at it again. I'll be like, oh, it really wasn't that bad. But no, this one I left feeling really excited about, which is, I don't want to say it's not common because I don't want to shit on other people I've worked with. There was just something really cool about this one. The vibe of it, the crew, like we went out the last day and we got drinks together and it was just I don't know, it just seemed like everyone made really fast friends. I hope everyone feels the same way.
Well, I think to do this kind of work and it's long days and you're in these really intimate settings and you're collaborating with people, right? And you're sharing ideas for the common goal of making something the best it can be. It's probably my favorite thing about the business.
Yeah, it really, and you know what? Also, we weren't selling anything. There wasn't a client. We just were in it together. Even the crew had to leave, and Billy and I would stay and shoot. A lot of times, the only thing that was open was McDonald's. So I ate McDonald's more in Sweden than I think I had in a while. But it was like, okay, hopefully everyone felt like we were making something really cool. And the acting was brilliant in it. You know, like those guys were so talented. Yeah, it was just positive, really positive.
Before we wrap up, what was your experience working in Sweden and, you know, on this project? What, you know, how was that experience for you? And, you know, what do you think you took away from that experience of just working in a different culture?
Yeah. Well, working in the cold, I've certainly done that before, and I've worked in the heat and, you know, in horrible conditions. And it wasn't that bad, actually. But I will say, I did notice the Swedes that were there. If the sun came out even for a second and it was frigid out, they were out like just bathing in it. So at lunch, we had this heated tent, and we're shooting on this road, and they're all, because the sun's out, eating their lunch in chairs in a row on the road with the sun. I thought that was funny. I think only me and Billy were in the tent, you know, like the heated tent. Not by choice. They wanted to be in the sun, you know. We do a lot of travel with this job. So, and you have to too, when you travel. I don't have the luxury on my jobs to travel sort of key people I like to work with very often, if ever. You have to be able to communicate with new people really, really quickly and get a vibe of, you know, whether you trust them or not, hopefully on a phone call when you tell them you're coming into town. So I guess I was prepared for walking in and being like the new guy on the crew. You know, that's not something that's foreign to me, even in a foreign country.
Last question. So the name of the show is ReFrame, and it's really about looking at things through a different lens, not just the physical camera lens, but just life in general.
Yeah.
You know, is there anything about your career journey or path or a specific project that you would like to reframe, or now that you've had some distance from it, you can see things for what they are? You know, what does, you know, we have these conversations off camera about how fortunate we are to do what we do. You know, essentially sometimes get paid to be kids in a sandbox.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. Is there anything you would go back and reframe?
Can I talk about it in the future?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, I would, you know, obviously everyone that does this probably doesn't get into it to be in advertising, although some do. Some are very passionate about advertising. And I love doing that stuff too, because at very least you're practicing your craft, right? And getting paid for it. And you're still telling stories.
Absolutely.
But I don't want to give up or grow up and give up on the dream of you know, just telling stories, making films. And I suppose in the future, I would love to make a film with my wife. And she's written some scripts, and I think they're really good. And I think she's really thoughtful and could be really talented at this, even though first time we do it will be her first film. And I know that just based on stuff that I work on that she watches, and she'll maybe give some constructive criticism. And I'm like, shit, she's right, you know, and or we're watching just a film at home or something. So that's something I would love to do in the future. What I will try to be doing differently now is balancing what's trendy and what's me. You know, and I feel like now I can maybe be a bit more confident in things that I like and the way that I would like them to look or feel, and that not be based on, you know, what's current. But you still have to stay current, right, in advertising and all that. So you can't just make something that looks like it was made in, you know, the 90s or something. Even though that might be on trend now, I'm not sure, but you know what I'm saying. I don't know if I'm articulating that right.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, because I think we're in this place where, you know, there was a time when I felt like I could keep track of the trends in the industry from a commercial standpoint every 5 years. I feel like now it's every 18 months.
Right, and also just like being confident in like even this, Chad. This is very much so at my comfort zone. If anyone else asked me to do it, I probably would have, I wouldn't have said no, I would have politely ignored their requests. But even, you know, things like this and just being confident in how I feel about stuff and working that way, I suppose. That's what I would do. That's what I hope to do differently. That's a bit fucking pretentious though, isn't it? Like a bit, you know, pine, like, I don't know. I'm not trying to be a philosopher.
No, man. I think that's a wonderful way to end. Thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for your friendship, for your artistry. For always making me laugh. Too. You know.
Okay.
The levity that you bring to our conversations. Some of which is not necessarily PG-13, but
depends.
Depends.
Yeah.
Depends.
Yeah.
So thanks a ton, and I appreciate it, man. And hopefully we'll see each other soon.